Okay, welcome to this video tutorial. In these couple videos, we're going to be doing a Blender crash course tutorial, and we're going to be using Blender 4.4.3, the newest version that we have currently on these computers here at school. And I'm going to be creating a basic object, something that would be kind of difficult to create with a parametric software or something else. So I'm going to create, since it's October, jack-o'-lantern. So we're going to make a little pumpkin and create this organic shape inside of Blender. I do have the shortcut keys. If you need those ones, they should be posted in the video or linked in the course as well. And I'm just going to be following along. This has a lot of the stuff, but it's still missing a couple of things, and I'll explain it as I'm going. So I'm going to jump into Blender. And in this first video, we're going to just do the mesh modeling side. So we're going to create our pumpkin. The next tutorial we'll probably do just our textures and get that ready to be a 3D printable texture if you're in the 3D printing class. So in here, to navigate inside of Blender, you have the middle mouse wheel. If you click that one and orbit around, you can orbit your model. If you do Shift and middle mouse wheel, you can pan your object around or your workspace. And then you can also zoom in around your object. Now, it doesn't work how SketchUp does, where it doesn't zoom in where your cursor is selected. It kind of has a main focal point for the camera. If I want to center whatever it is I'm working on to view, you can see if I kind of pan off to the distance and then try to zoom into my cube, it doesn't let me get too far. So if I want to zoom my selection to the center of my viewport, I can just hit the period on my numpad key, or I could go up here to view, and then, let's see, frame selected right there. So numpad period. So I'm going to do that one, or I'm just going to be hitting that on my numpad here as well. So in case you see me kind of jumping around a bit and it zooms into my object, that's what I'm pressing. So for this first video, since we're not going to be rendering or animating any of this, I'm going to do a box select over my camera and my light and just hit delete to get those out of there. We're just going to be working with just our cube here. And we'll probably be able to start with some kind of shape like this. We might delete our cube and start with something else, but you can actually make quite a bit of stuff with just the default cube alone. So I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard for that, and we're going to bring in a different primitive shape to start and work with. So I'm going to do add, and we're going to add a mesh. If I want to bring up the shortcut key for this, instead of going to the top, I can do Shift A, and it'll just bring up this add menu wherever my cursor is, if I'm in this viewport here. If I'm in the viewport over here, it's a little different. So in the 3D work viewport, Shift A, and I'm going to add a UV sphere. A UV sphere is kind of like it has latitude and longitude lines, and that's going to work for making like a pumpkin shape. We can dip in the two pole caps and kind of move those out of the way. So I know I have the watermark down here at the bottom, but if you open this little window down here when you're adding a sphere, once I click away, that menu goes away. There is a shortcut to bring it back up. I don't remember what it is, but you can just bring in and start a new object. And here you can change your segments a little bit, where actually I want to start modeling this with a low poly shape, and we're going to add extra resolution to our model later on. So I might do an even number, so then maybe I can grab half of these. I might do something like 20 segments there, and then for my rings, maybe if I want a midpoint, I'll also do an equal amount there, so I'll move this to maybe 8 as well, something like that. That probably works. Doesn't have to be exactly that, but that's going to be good enough. If I want to change the radius of my pumpkin, I could as well, but I'm going to just leave that as at 1, and then we can scale it when we get to maybe our 3D printer or our scene and environment that we're animating it in, or wherever we're using this model. So now, if I click away, it's going to close out that little menu down at the bottom left. So now I have my pumpkin. I want to rename this So if I go up here to my collection, and here is my sphere, I just want to rename this so I have something to work with. So there we go. Caps lock is on, of course, but I'll work with it. So now here's my shape, and if I want to start manipulating this geometry, there's a couple ways I can do it. I can use modifiers, and we'll get to those here in a bit, but for starting, we're going to just go into our edit mode and work with mesh modeling. So you can go up to the top here from object mode to edit mode, or the shortcut key for that is tab. So you can hit tab to toggle in and out of edit mode. And inside there, you have your vertice selection, your edge selection, or your face selection. Each one is a little bit different. So face selection, it grabs the full face. Edge selection, I can grab just some edges, and then same with vertices. And then another thing for selection, if I do shift, you can add objects to your selection. If I start with a new selection and I hold control, it's going to choose the shortest path from the previous selection to the next. If I do alt, it will choose that full loop of whatever you're selecting. And a loop is going to be either this direction or up and down on this one here. So then I can grab this loop if I grab more favoring this line, or this edge by grabbing this loop here. So that is a couple different selection tools. I'm going to go back to our vertice selection, and now with my vertice selection, I can turn on my proportional editing. And that's going to be this little tab up here at the top. My record button is in the way. There we go. So with proportional editing turned on, what that does, you have a little drop down here that has different options of what you can use for kind of the interpolation of its proportional editing. So now if I hit G to grab and move my object, and I can use my scroll wheel to increase or decrease my envelope of this proportional editing. Then if I want to lock that onto an axis, I can hit X, Y, or for this case, I want to hit Z. And then I can change that envelope a little bit so that I can kind of get the top shape of my pumpkin. There we go. And then do the same on the bottom. So G to grab, Z to lock it on the axis, change my envelope a little bit, and there we go. If I want to affect some more of my pumpkin shape, I can do Alt to select that whole loop of those vertices, maybe grab that and move it up. I could even scale that up and change my envelope for the scale, and then that should be good. If I want this to be more of an organic shape, I could even add some of that in here by just changing my proportional editing and moving some of these around a little bit. Maybe up here at the top, move some of these around, make it a little bit less uniform and a more organic shape. Something like this. There we go. And that'll work. So it doesn't look much like a pumpkin yet, so we'll add some extra topology inside here. So we're working with a low poly mesh. We're going to start adding some modifiers inside here to make this look a little bit better. So I'm going to go to my modifiers tab, and I'm going to hit the plus icon here, and we can search for a modifier. Once you get to know the names, you can use that. I use the search a lot. Or you can go through here and find the modifier that you're looking for. And we want this subdivision surface. So if we apply this one here and increase the amount of levels that it has, you can see that it increases its resolution. If we go back to edit mode and we look at our object here, we can see our original mesh we were working in low poly. So we still have our simple mesh we can work with, but then it subdivides the whole mesh to make this higher resolution object. And I can change my resolution as well. The nice thing is, if I want to turn this modifier off, I can hit this real-time render so it turns off my modifier as I'm modeling. That can be really nice if it's really lagging your computer, say if you have a Boolean operation or something else working with this mesh, it might be lagging some things down, so you can turn off some modifiers to go back and see what the previous mesh looked like. The other key that's here is on cage, which is kind of handy where it snaps the low topology onto the subdivision mesh that it's going to create. So when I'm in edit mode, I can grab and work with this like it's actually a part of my mesh and kind of get a little bit more accurate with how I want it to look. So I can get some shapes here, and then there we go. Now, same thing, I want to add maybe those stripes on the top of a pumpkin, so, or on the sides going down the pumpkin. So if I go and do Alt, and maybe I could grab every other loop. So if I do Alt and Shift and grab every other loop here, there we go. And then with all those selected, we could just scale that down, and it's scaling all of it because my proportional editing is on. Let me just turn that back off. And then I can scale this down until it looks kind of where I want it to. I can do Shift Z to scale it only on the X and Y axis. So then maybe that doesn't kind of pinch those top and bottom corners in too much. So scale, Shift Z, and then bring that in just a little bit. Something like that. And there we go. So now there's my pumpkin. I can increase my subdivision level. That looks pretty good. Maybe I could have had more of those when I was first creating my object before I got to this point, but it still looks pretty nice. So that's the start of my pumpkin so far. I like that shape. I think I can work with that one. Oh, before I go any further, I haven't saved my files, so I'm going to save my Blender file just so that I don't lose any of my work. And I'm just going to save this to my downloads. There we go. Alright, so for this pumpkin, the next thing we're going to do, maybe before we get to carving the face or anything, maybe we could add the stem. That will be a nice simple operation that we can do before we get to the other ones. So I'm going to do Shift A again so that we can add a new object. And I'm going to go to cylinder. And here, again, I can see how many vertices I have. And if I want my stem to have a texture on that as well, I might want to select every other vertices for this, kind of like I was before. So I'm going to just choose an even number. Doesn't matter which even number. Maybe I'll do 16. And then my radius, I'm just going to decrease that a little bit, and maybe even decrease my depth. Get it something kind of close. There we go. So now there's my object. It's kind of buried inside my pumpkin. So I might hit G to grab and move that up. And I'm just going to hit Z to move it just vertically for right now. And there we go. So there's the primitive shape that I'm going to use to start modeling the stem of my pumpkin. So now I can go into Tab to go back into edit mode, and I'm going to grab my face selection, and I can scale one of these faces down just a little bit to kind of make it a little bit of a pointed stem, or it tapers out a little bit. Something like that. Maybe the whole thing is kind of large, so I can hit A to select all, and then I can scale all that down just a little bit more just to get my scale right. So that looks pretty good. The next thing, speaking of scale, if I want to look at how big my objects are, or looking at the transform menu, I want to open that up. So that's going to be this little arrow over here, or the shortcut is M to open my transform. And the reason I'm bringing this up is scale sometimes can affect your modifiers and a lot of the other stuff you're doing. So say if I was in object mode and I scale my stem down, that now is at a smaller scale, so it might affect how the modifiers are affecting your shape. So if I want to apply my scale, I can just do Control A to apply that scale. Otherwise, if I do undo, I can undo my scale, or if I want to undo a scale really easily, I can do Alt S and it'll bring it back to normal. So you want to have your objects at one scale, or just default scale whenever you can. So now, going back to our stem, we can go into here, and I want to do the same thing. I want to select every other edge. And that might be kind of tricky to go through and do for every single one of these. What I can do, if I select all of this, it didn't get all the way through, I'm going to go to my view, my wireframe mode, select all of these edges. Now I can go back to default shading. And the nice thing, if I go to select, I can do checker deselect. So instead of grabbing every other one, especially for something simple like this, I can checker deselect that, and it grabs every other one for me. Now, same thing, I can hit S to scale, and it's kind of getting a little spiky at the top and bottom, so I can do Shift Z to scale it only on the Z axis and bring that down, something like that. And now that's going to be the base shape for my stem. So let's see what that's going to look like and add our subdivision modifier. So I'm just going to search for it. There's our subdivision, and it came in a little bit weird, so even if we increase our levels a little bit, it looks like a kind of deflated balloon or like a water droplet. So we are going to change how that looks a little bit. So in here, I'm going to go into edit mode, and again, it's hard to see with the wireframe. I'm going to just turn off my modifier for just a moment, hitting this real-time view, so we can turn it back on later, so I don't have to delete it and reapply it. Just turns it off right now. So if I go to this face here and grab just the whole face, I want to add a crease to this top edge so that it doesn't turn into a little point like it's doing at the end of this little modifier. So to do that, if I go up here to edge, and here's your crease, and you can see the shortcut next to it is Shift E. So if I'm going to add this edge crease and turn this up until it's 1, now it's going to have this purple line on the outside. If I turn my modifier back on, you can see it creased that edge bowl, but it's still subdivided the rest of the object. So I'm going to do the same down here. Maybe grab just my edges. There we go. And then Shift E for that edge crease. And then you can even control the amount so it's not 100% if you want it kind of tapered if you want. And maybe we'll even try something like that where it merges with the pumpkin, just to see. And then at the very top, a nice sharp cut where they might have chopped it off the vine. So now here is our stem. Looks pretty good. But now we want to bend our stem, give it a little bit of extra shape. So I'm going to go to our modifier tab, go to this deform, maybe, and curve. I don't think that's going to be the one we want to do. We actually want this one that looks like simple deform. So you can kind of play around with a lot of the other ones. This is going to be the one that can bend our object around. So we can go into here and change some of these modifiers settings to see where it's bending, and we can get this to bend maybe kind of an extreme angle there. That looks pretty good. So now, interesting thing, if I go and just turn off my previous modifier, I'll turn both of them off really quick so you can see. If I have both modifiers turned off, so not even my subdivision is on there, and I try to apply this bend, it's not wanting to bend this shape. If we look in wireframe mode, it's because these are straight edges, and in Blender you can't actually bend lines or anything like that. You have to add those subdivisions or those segments so that you can actually bend those points at those pivot points. So if I want to add those segments in, before I even have the subdivision on, I can hit Tab to go into my edit mode, and here's my object. If I want to see the same thing, I can hit on cage to see my result. So now here's my shape, and I want to add what is a loop cut. So a loop cut is going to be Control R. If I add one loop cut, you can see now it's starting to kind of give it something that it can actually bend. Same thing each time I add another loop cut. If I turn this back off, you can see what it's actually doing, where I'm just adding loop cuts here, and then it's putting them into my object. I'm going to undo all those though, because you can kind of get it subdivided equally by just doing Control R for loop cut and then using your scroll wheel to increase the amount of cuts that you want to do. So now I can start placing those. If I want them centered, I can just right click those, and now they're perfectly set up how they should be. So now that looks really nice. If I turn on my subdivision back on, now it's actually bending and it's a really nice curve, and everything is working pretty good. So going all the way back, this is our original shape. It has some segments going up, and the whole thing is tapered all the way down, and then we apply our subdivision, smooths the whole object out, and then we apply our bend so it bends that object. If I go into edit mode into my original object, now I can even go and maybe grab these bottom edges. If I just scale these last edges up, you can get it a little bit of a fancy kind of bottom of the stem. I can control that or move that up a little bit more. Maybe even do the bottom too. Maybe go to my wireframe mode, select all these, scale this up, do Shift C, there we go. And there's going to be my stem. If I want this to be at a different angle, I could just go into object mode and rotate this, or because the origin of my part is at this little orange dot you can see, and whenever I hit G inside object mode, move my part, the origin is moving with it. That's where most modifiers are being applied from. Kind of like on this bend, it's like pivot point a little bit. So if I am in edit mode and I move my object around that origin at all, it changes how it's bending that whole object. So I can hit Z to move it up, and then if I have, let me just turn all these off so you can see, my original shape, I just have it where the origin point is close to the base so that the base stays level where it's not bending, and then it's bending the rest above the origin point. So I can turn those back on, and there's my stem. Now I can move it into position in my pumpkin. And if I look inside of my pumpkin, you can see I have a little bit of an air gap here. I might want to change that so that my stem is still attaching to my whole pumpkin, but I don't want a floating piece inside here. So I could even just go tab to go into edit mode, and I might just extrude this out a little bit further. It goes all the way through my pumpkin, but we're going to Boolean those together so that it'll make one object. So as long as the outside looks good, we'll be able to get the inside later on. And we might even try to cut the stem to be separate to begin with, so that when it comes to texturing, we can apply textures a little bit easier. We'll get to that later on. So now with this, we have our stem here, but it's kind of just going straight out. It's a little bit unexciting, or it's kind of boring, I guess. So let's add a little bit of a twist to the stem. So let's add, you can see in simple deform you have twist right there. So let's just add another simple deform and add a twist. And if we add this twist and it's not applying it on the right axis, so if we apply it to the z-axis, you can see it's not actually twisting the profile of the stem around my object. And that is because of the order of operations of my modifiers. So it's trying to do the subdivision first, and then it's trying to give the stem a bend second, and then the third one is trying to twist on the z-axis after that. So it's twisting the bend after the bend is being completed. So if I just drag one of these up and change the order of operations, now you can see if I turn off my final bend, here's what the twist operation is actually doing, and then the bend modifier is being applied afterwards. So I can still increase my twist and then have my bend modifier being a completely separate modifier. Something like that, and then change my angle a little bit. There we go. And that looks pretty good. So now there's my stem. I added a little bit of a twist to it, and there's our pumpkin, and that's looking pretty good so far. Next, we're going to go through and make the face that we're going to cut out on this pumpkin next. So I might get a front view, or whichever one I decide is the front view, and I want to add a new object that we're going to use for the face, or at least the cutting object for the face. Let me rename some of my objects. And this one here is my stem. Alright, so I'm going to do Shift A to add a new object, and I'm going to add a plane. And let me zoom selected really quick so we can see. There we go. So there's our plane, and I'm just going to rename this to be my face. There we go. And now I'm just going to be using this object to create the face that we're going to be cutting out. So I'm going to hit Tab, and now inside here, if I look at my vertices, I have all 4 of these vertices, and really I'm going to delete all of it so I can start from scratch and just kind of start drawing out my profile. And I could just delete everything. That would be one way. Maybe I could just leave one vertice left over. One way I like to do it with hitting A, so everything is selected on this plane. I can hit M to merge, and merge everything at center. So now all that did, if I go into wireframe mode, I can hit G now, and you can see, since I'm in edit mode, that little darker orange dot, that is actually the vertice. If I go back into object mode, you can see that's the vertice, and then it has its own origin point. So back into edit mode, I just have one vertice in this whole object. That's all that is inside here, and I can use that to kind of start drawing out my shape. So I can hit E to extrude, and then E to extrude again here, and now I can start drawing something of a profile to make like the triangles that I can cut out for the eyes. And then if I want to join these, if I grab 2 vertices with Shift and hit F, it fills those 2 vertices in with a line. Or if I hit all of it and hit F, it fills that in with a face as well that you can see is highlighted orange. So if I go back a couple before I fill in that edge, you can even do it here where if I hit F, it fills in that final edge and just draws that together to make that plane. So now I can do the same. I'm going to do Shift D on a vertice and move that to the other side. And now I can hit E to extrude and do the same on this profile. And then maybe grab all this and hit F. And there is this other eye for the pumpkin. There we go. So now if I want to duplicate the whole thing, I can grab the whole triangle, Shift D to duplicate that. And then if I scale this, and if I scale on the Y axis, I can shrink that down a little bit, and then it looks a little bit better. Now if I want to move these edges around, or maybe start making my face, I'm going to move this vertice, so Shift D to make a duplicate, and start on the very corner of the mouth that I want to start making. So now I can start drawing the profile for my mouth as well, so I'm going to hit E to extrude, E to extrude here, maybe give him a couple little teeth. And then I'm just going to do 2 vertices on the corners, on the edges there, and then I'm going to do the same profile down here, E, here's other tooth, and then let me hit G to move this one. Now if I want to join those 2 vertices, I can hit F to fill those 2 in, and then kind of adjust the rest from there. It's kind of hard to see what I'm working on, so I can hide my pumpkin. There we go. Now that I have at least the outside or outlining profile. Move some of these around. There we go. And now say if I want the face to be a little bit more curved, same thing, I like to create my geometry at low poly and add those extra subdivisions in afterwards. So if I want it to be curved from here to each tooth, I might take this individual point put it about halfway between each line. Same with this one here, kind of midpoint or so. Same with this one, kind of trickier. Midpoint, and I might even exaggerate it a little bit further, and we're gonna bevel that in afterwards. So I'm gonna start with this one here, get it about halfway between each line, and if I do Control B to bevel, it wants to bevel three-dimensional geometry with Control B, so it's not letting me do anything. So if I do Control Shift B to bevel, it will let me bevel individual vertices. So then I can use my scroll wheel to increase these a couple times and get some nice little curve to it. Same thing with this curve. I want, see if I have it less equal on both sides, and I kind of try to Control Shift B that I get the corner before I get all the way over there, so I don't really get too much control. So I like to try to make these nice and even on both sides. Control Shift B, something like that. And it's not the right curve, so if I undo that, you can see I'm kind of exaggerating where that point is so that the curve comes into that endpoint. So Control Shift B, increase my vertices. It's a little bit more of a 90 degrees, so maybe I exaggerated too much. There we go. That looks good. And then I'll just go through the rest of these and make it look pretty good. There. So now there's my face. If I hit A and select all, you can see with my face selection, really only those triangles are filled in with a face. So I'm going to go back to my edge, hit F, or hit A to select all, hit F to fill in those faces, and there we go. So now I created my pumpkin on that plane, and I used my little navigation tool up at the top there so that I could get a front view. But let's just say, for instance, some of your parts were off a little bit. So if you had certain parts that were, this has happened to me, I guess, a little bit when I'm tracing objects and everything looks good from this viewport here. But then if you zoom around and everything kind of starts getting a little bit janky and a little bit wonky, if everything is on the X or the Y plane, or even the Z plane, as long as it's on one of those three planes, you can flatten this whole thing out really easily. So if I hit A to grab all, and I hit S to scale, I can scale this on the X plane, and then if I just type 0, you can think you're scaling on the X plane times 0. Anything times 0 is 0, so if you manipulate or multiply all the X-axis coordinates by 0, it's nice and flat. So now I can just extrude this whole thing out by hitting E to extrude, and there's my face. So now I can close out of my edit mode, and I might turn my pumpkin back on to see where it's at. Go back to, or before I go to solid view, I might go into edit mode here, and I can even move some of these in so it's just going through maybe an inch or so into the pumpkin, or a little bit further so it's cutting all the way through the shell of my pumpkin. But say if you wanted it to be a little bit better than just straight perpendicular cuts, I could scale my outside face a little bit, maybe even scale this inside face, kind of like someone was using a knife to carve into the pumpkin, and they're kind of tapered in just a little bit. Maybe I could do a little bit more, move that closer, there we go, that looks good. Cool, something like that. So now that looks pretty nice. I think that looks pretty good. So now we're going to cut this face out. So to cut it out of my pumpkin here, first, before I go any further, I'm going to just save my file, just so then it's been a little while since I've saved. It's good practice. Now I'm going to go back to my pumpkin, and we have our subdivision modifier applied. We're going to add another modifier, and we're going to add a Boolean operation. So that should be in generate, and a Boolean is going to add or subtract or union all your objects together. So I'm on my pumpkin, and here I'm going to do difference because I want to cut out the face. And now I can go to my object, grab this eyedropper tool, and just select the face as my cutting object. And now we can see if it worked or not by clicking on the face here, and I'm just going to hide that. You can either do with the eyedropper eyeball here or with H on your keyboard. So part of it didn't come out and it didn't cut all of my objects. It only cut one eye out. And so we have to kind of look and see why it did that. One thing I like to do sometimes that works, this is probably another thing, but if I switch between fast and exact, actually that fixes it. So that is one option that you can do. Sometimes you can also go to solver and fix it that way. Sometimes with the fast, it's kind of hard to tell what it is that it's fixing. So I'm going to go back to my jack-o'-lantern face that I'm cutting out, and I want to view the normals of my geometry. Normals are the inside and the outside of every single face that you have in Blender. Since this isn't parametric or everything, you don't have every single time, you don't always have a watertight mesh. You have to create your watertight meshes and that kind of stuff and be aware of that kind of stuff. So if I want to look at my normals and see which orientation my faces are at, it's going to be right next up here in my different viewport shadings. So here where I went to wireframe view, solid view, here's your texture preview, and then the last one is your shading preview. Sometimes it takes a second to load, but that's just going to be the one with lighting. I'm really in just mesh modeling. I'm working only in wireframe and default shading for this one. Until I get to textures, I'll get to the next ones. But right next to those, you can get this little drop down here. So you hit this little triangle drop down, and we're going to do face orientation. Looking at our face orientation, you can see all of the face objects that didn't cut in our operation, they just turned in, or they were inside out. So because they're inside out, it didn't want to cut any of those out or anything like that, because there's no intersecting geometry, because it thinks that the eye or the mouth or anything is actually a hole and the rest of the universe is the solid mass, but then there's no border outside there, so it gets confused. So if I want to fix my normals, I'm going to go to my jack-o'-lantern face, go into edit mode, and I can hit A to grab all of my vertices at the same time, even if you have floating objects. So if I hit L, we'll grab anything linked. You can see this face is a completely separate body than the rest of it, but I can do multiple bodies all at the same time. So I can hit A, go to Mesh, and in our Mesh tab, you can go to these Normals tab and do Recalculate Outside. Recalculates the whole outside looking into your mesh and looking at any watertight solid, and then figures out what should be inside and what should be out. Now if I go back into edit mode and hide this, you can see even with my exact mode that fixed the problem. So going between fast and exact probably fixed those normals for me automatically. I've also noticed that Blender does have a little bit of a rounding sometimes, where if you have a vertice at 0.000001 and then another vertice at that same decimal place 2, Blender might just round those together and say they're at the same point. But if you have it at exact, it might keep those points in the math, and then it tries to get it exact, but it just rounds that out of the math and doesn't count for that space. So switching to fast sometimes fixes that extremely small resolution or that rounding error that Blender has a little bit, or any 3D software has when you get down to that fine of resolution. So that looks pretty good, but our face gets cut in, and it's not actually a shell of our pumpkin yet. And that's just because we actually haven't added any kind of shell to our pumpkin. So we can do that next. So I'm going to click on my pumpkin and go to my Modify tab, and I'm going to go to, I believe, Solidify. So we can kind of look through each one and sometimes find it using the icon. And there we go, Solidify. And if we look at this here, might help in wireframe mode. And if I look at this, I can increase my distance here, and it's solidifying the outside of my pumpkin. But if you also look, it's solidifying the cutout of our face, and it's kind of being a little bit weird. We don't need to solidify those cuts any further. So again, order of operations for your modifiers. There's nothing wrong of how we have it. It's just the order of operations that we want to do this in will fix all of our stuff. So if we like our distance here, maybe I like a little bit thicker of a pumpkin. There we go. So that's pretty good distance on the wall of the pumpkin, but it's kind of messing your geometry up. If you go up here to your modifier and just drag and reorder your modifiers, and then it goes through and then it fixes the whole thing. So it goes through, cuts your object out, and it looks kind of pretty nice. The one thing is our stem is kind of sticking through our mesh just a little bit, and you can kind of see it on the inside of our pumpkin. But we like the top of it, so we might want to just cut this out from our pumpkin a little bit and then apply it back on. So let's see. For right now, if I go to my pumpkin and turn off my solidify, just hitting the little key, the real time, and I might do the same, scroll down. I can even collapse this if I want to make it a little easier. I'm going to turn off my boolean and my solidify in my pumpkin. I can collapse my other modifiers if I want to make it a little easier as well. So now you can see where I want to cut my stem. So with no modifiers being applied to my pumpkin here, I can go to this stem and go to a boolean modifier and do a difference, and I want to grab my eyedropper tool and select my pumpkin. Ooh, I went all the way through. There we go. So I select my pumpkin and it cuts it all the way through, and it looks really nice. I hid my modifiers or deactivated them because if I undo my solidify, you can see once the modifier is being applied in real time, it's also affecting the modifier on the other mesh. So it's cutting that apart, but then leaving the whole kind of island underneath there. So if I turn off my solidify on my pumpkin, it cuts the whole bottom of my stem off, and now I can apply this modifier and then come back to my pumpkin. So from this point, I might start collapsing my modifier stack. I have a lot of stuff going on. It is generating this every single time, so if I turn all these off, you can see that's my actual mesh, and whenever I'm moving this around or doing anything, it's going back through and applying all these modifiers to it. So if you move the geometry, it's going to go through and do that math all over again. So I want to collapse our modifier stack. I can do that by just right-clicking and convert to a mesh. So I can convert that to a mesh, and it just collapses your whole stack, and now that stem is a nice solid object, and it's set in stone, basically. I can do the same now to my pumpkin, where since I applied my modifier to my stem, I can return on my solidify and my boolean operation. And now I can see on the inside here, it looks really nice, and the stem isn't sticking through the bottom of my pumpkin. So I could even do that as a dual color print on any FDM print or anything. Just choose that as its own STL, and then the pumpkin is its own. But before I do that, I would have to apply my transform, because the origin point of your object affects dual color printing for FDM prints. I'll get to all that kind of stuff here in a minute here, but looking at this now, I can do the same thing, I think, on my pumpkin. I like how this looks. It's a good thickness of the pumpkin, so I think that's good to go. I'm going to apply this modifier as well, or all of these modifiers, and collapse them. I can apply them one by one by going to each one drop down and doing apply if I want to apply one modifier at a time. If I want to collapse all of it at once, I can just right click, convert to mesh, and there we go. So now I can even go to my jack-o'-lantern face, hit G to move that out of the way, and now it's not affecting anything. I can even delete that, and now I have both my objects ready to go. So I might do front view. I kind of like to orient my objects so they're kind of nice and level, so the origin is at the bottom. That looks pretty good. And I grabbed everything by just hitting A and moving it all in object mode just to move that all at once. And now, like I was mentioning, the origin point of your objects affects how regular FDM prints are going to choose the color. So I don't have to apply color or anything like that for multicolor material or like FDM prints or anything that's using multiple nozzles or that has a material changing station. But I want those origins to be in the same place. And I also just moved my pumpkin, so its origin is also in a different place. So when I grab both of these, you can see the rotation of my stem is at a different rotation. It's not at 0, 0. And then the location of my pumpkin isn't zeroed out either. So I want to zero all of my location, rotation, and scale out. Don't worry about dimensions, that's just based off a part. So if I grab all these together, I can do it all at the same time. I can just do Control A to apply, and now you can do one at a time. So if I do apply location, you can see the origin point of both the pumpkin and the object now are at 0, 0. So now if I did a dual color print, those would be aligned and that should work just fine. However, my rotation of my stem isn't zeroed out. So I'm going to do both of those, and I just like to go apply and just do all transforms. It takes care of everything, it zeroes out your location, rotation, and scale. So now that's at the real scale, and it should be good to go. Scale is a whole nother thing when it comes to 3D printing out of Blender. A lot of the times I set up my template to be a certain scale. A lot of it just kind of comes to drawing something to the dimensions that you have in Blender, exporting it and bringing it into your slicer. What dimension does it come at to? And then you go and affect things like your scale and your world properties. Scene here, you can go to your units, change all your units there and everything like that when you go to 3D print. But I think that's about it for this whole tutorial for mesh modeling. My pumpkin looks pretty good. I have two separate objects, my stem and my pumpkin. They're not joined together just yet. I probably will join those together here in a little bit, but I'm just keeping them separate so that it's going to make texturing a little bit easier later on as well. I think that's it for this part of the project. The next one, I'll talk a little bit more about this scale, as well as getting into applying materials and textures to our object. That should be about it.